We're so happy you've joined us today for Pride. It started with a riot, centering the history of BIPOC, trans, and non-binary people who ignited the modern-day LGBTQ civil rights movement, facing Louisville legends Dr. Kaila Story and Jaison Gardner. A brief note to our participants today: we will be recording the dialogue, so those unable to join will have the opportunity to watch later. This work is collective, and before introducing our incredible panelists, I want to take a minute to express gratitude for the talented LGBT Center team, Byron Terry, Brevin Woodford, and Goldie Latta, whose hard work and dedication to LGBT Center programs, events, and trainings make our work possible. Goldie's also working behind the scenes with the Zoom today, so thanks so much for all your hard work. Special thanks also to Will Baumgartner, president of the Pride Alumni Council, and Nakia Strickland of the U of L Alumni Relations Office for partnering with the LGBT Center on this program. And if you're interested in joining the Pride Alumni Council, I'll make sure to post that information in the chat before we end today. The topic for today's presentation was inspired by the numerous companies that you've probably seen that turn their social media profiles to rainbow, along with all the rainbow marketing on products like shoes, cookies, and more. Now, don't get me wrong, I love rainbows and I love cookies, and I can't imagine what it would have been like to have LGBTQ affirming images in the 70s and 80s when I was a young person. At the same time, I also wondered what these companies, organizations, and groups did in Kentucky and across the nation when trans and non-binary youth were under attack during the recent legislative sessions. Despite the sea of rainbows and the progress we've made, the very people who ignited our movement, BIPOC, trans, and non-binary people, are still under attack, and their history and contributions are often forgotten. I think you'll agree that there's no better team to amplify this important part of our history than Dr. Kaila Story and Jaison Gardner from Team Strange Fruit, and it's my honor to welcome them today. As you all know, they really need no introduction, but let me just share because it's pretty impressive. As you know, Jaison Gardner is a proud Louisvillian who's a longtime social justice advocate, health educator, and community organizer for more than 20 years. Since 2012, Jaison is the co-producer, co-creator, and co-host with Dr. Kaila Story of WFPL's Strange Fruit, Musings on Pop Culture and Black Gay Life. If you haven't checked this out, you definitely do yourself a favor and look up that podcast. A former columnist for the Leo and contributor to the Courier Journal, Jaison's also a frequent keynote speaker, presenter, moderator, diversity trainer, and event MC, who you may have also seen at U of L events, whose work focuses on a variety of issues, especially the intersection of LGBTQ issues and racial justice. Jaison's the recipient of the Kentucky Alliance Racist and Political Repression Leadership Award and is included in University of Kentucky's Notable African Americans database and the Williams-Nicholson Collection, a national LGBTQ archive housed right here at the University of Louisville. Jaison firmly believes that a threat to justice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. I won't tell you how long we've known each other. Also, we have Dr. Kaila Story, wild applause for Dr. Kaila Story, an associate professor in the Department of Women and Gender Sexuality Studies and Pan-African Studies, as well as the Audre Lorde Endowed Chair at the University of Louisville. She joins Jaison as the co-creator, co-producer, and co-host of WFPL's Strange Fruit, Musings on Pop Culture and Black Gay Life. Her research also examines the intersections of race, sexuality, with special attention to Black feminism, Black lesbianism, and Black queer identity. Dr. Story has numerous awards, including being named LGBTQ Community Leader and Changemaker as part of NBC's inaugural Pride 30, and was also chosen by The Advocate as a 2022 Champion of Pride for the state of Kentucky. And wait, there's more. Dr. Story was also the 2019 LGBT Center Advocate Award winner. Thank you both so much for being here today. You are both incredibly busy, and it means so much that you took your time out of your day to be here with us. And without further ado, I will hand it off to our panelists. Thank you.
All righty. Good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon, Doc.
Hi.
First off, shout out to the person in the chat who's already given us applause. I like it. If you ever see me host live in person, I love applause. So thank you, Lisa, for having us. Thank you, Goldie, for having us as well and working out the technical stuff. Thank you to the entire staff at the LGBT Center and the Pride Alumni Council for having us. And so, Doc, you know, this conversation is one that you and I have had on the podcast before. It's one that you and I have, you know, when we're just hanging out as best friends, and we've talked about it for a long time, and it's certainly rooted, you know, my work is rooted in this subject, as is your work to a large degree, and that is about what I consider queer culture versus gay ink, right? And the sanitizing, the whitewashing, the commodification of queer culture, LGBTQ history. And so I want to we want to remember that Pride started as a riot, and we think about 1969, literally the Stonewall riots. And so how do we go from the Stonewall riots to having KFC and no, it was a Burger King that released a Pride ad.
Yeah, the Burger King ad.
Two in Europe, right? They had 2 top buns and 2 bottom buns. So not only is it celebrating Pride, but it's also an awfully risque ad, right? But how do we go both literally and figuratively from this kind of activist, rebellious, necessary event to now having gayness everywhere, so to speak, but then also what do we lose in the process? What is gained and what is lost? But maybe you can just start out by telling us a bit about the origins of Pride. Who are some of the key figures? I remember there's a popular movie that shows some white dude from the Midwest through the first brick at Pride, right? Is that true or untrue? But just tell us a bit about the history of Pride as a riot.
Yes, no, certainly. And thank you to Lisa and the LGBT Center and everyone who made this talk possible. It's so frustrating every Pride Month for folks who know the true beginnings of queer liberation and LGBTQ advocacy in its real and grassroots form versus this really corporatized version of celebrating pride and LGBT identities through selling products and whatnot. And so I'm going to start by talking about the Stonewall riots that happened on June 28th in 1969. Now, this is a pivotal point in queer liberation because it really turns the nation's focus to LGBT advocacy and LGBTQ rights and what that means and looks like for the community. But what I want to make clear is that one, Black and Latinx LGBTQ folk in particular were already organizing in civil disobedience and mass resistance prior to Stonewall. So Stonewall is viewed as this crescendo moment, but for many Black and Latinx, particularly Black trans, Latinx trans women in particular, they had already been agitating and ruffling feathers when it came to activism across racial lines and so on and so forth. And their legacy gets lost in the corporatizing and the co-optation of Pride. So on June 28th, 1969, this is why we celebrate Pride Month in the month of June, there were 3 days of rioting and civil disobedience against 400 New York City police officers. LGBTQ folks at the Stonewall Inn were tired of the raves that police would do. They were tired of the police brutality. They were tired of the scrutiny. They would break into these queer bars and they would write people's names down, publish them in the paper. They would out folks. They would humiliate them and dehumanize them. They would antagonize them for any bit of thing, right? So this had been going on for a long time prior to Stonewall, and Stonewall is this big crescendo moment. And so it's a crucial moment in the genealogy of queer and trans activism. And it's pivotal because before Stonewall, there were about 50 gay and lesbian organizations in the country, right? After Stonewall, only 4 years after Stonewall, there were over 800. Right? So it becomes a really, really big moment. But the key figures in this, right? As Jay mentioned, there was a 2015 movie called Stonewall. And the movie tried to re-envision what happened at Stonewall by centering the film on this cis white male gay protagonist from the Midwest. This is not the legacy of queer liberation and resistance, right? And what I want to make clear is for many, not radical white LGBT folk, but for many white gay and lesbian folk, their politicizing of their queer identities and trans identities don't really happen until Stonewall, right? Where there was already this politicized connection, especially for Black and Latinx LGBTQ people, because they were dealing with racial injustice and inequality. They were dealing with apartheid abroad. They were involved in not only national organizations, but organizations that were international. So I wanted to talk to y'all about Sylvia Rivera, who was the Puerto Rican and Venezuelan trans woman activist who's one of the main agitators at the Stonewall riots. Prior to Stonewall, Sylvia was already organizing with the Black Panther Party for self-defense. So, and she also ran tough with the Young Lords. And Victoria Cruz, a Latinx trans woman who was really close with both Marsha P. Johnson and Sylvia Rivera, said, you know, Sylvia was one of the only trans girls she knew who ran with the Young Lords. And the Young Lords were an activist group that fought for the empowerment of Latino people in the States, while also opposing US imperialism in Puerto Rico simultaneously. So we have to be clear in that Sylvia, as well as Marsha P., saw their activism as not only transcending LGBTQ communities, but also getting involved with racial communities, class communities, right? They were thinking about—
We think of as intersectional organizing, yeah.
Exactly. They were already invested in this kind of intersectional organizing. And so after, shortly thereafter, Stonewall, you have Sylvia and you have Marsha P. Johnson. Marsha P., they both were founders of the Street Transvestite Action Revolutionaries, known as STAR, which is an organization that worked tirelessly to protect trans youth and made sure that their needs dealing with houselessness and poverty were met. So we know Marsha P., the P stands for Pay It No Mind Johnson, and Marsha advocated on behalf of not only LGBT folk, right, but also sex workers, prisoners, victims of police brutality, those living with HIV/AIDS, those who were suffering through not only society's racism, but also gay cis racism and cis normativity, right? So we don't live in an LGBTQ community that is this kumbaya, everybody's accepted. We have our own internal issues that are specific to our community. So gay racism, cis normativity. We have cis gays who hold transphobic views and anti-trans views. We have white gays and lesbians who hold very racist and white supremacist views. And so for Black and Latinx LGBTQ people in particular, Stonewall was vital because it connected all those things together. It addressed gendered and sexual tyranny at the same time that it addressed racial and class injustice, and also the police. And so in the movie Stonewall in 2015, they have this young cis gay white boy from the Midwest who throws the brick. And this reimagining of the real history is a huge problem, because the one that is mainly rumored to do this, who threw the first brick and who ignited the 3 days of rioting, is Stormy, and I always get this child's name wrong, but Stormy DeLarverie. I always want to say
DeLarverie.
DeLarverie, thank you, because I always want to say De La Vu, and that's not what it is at all.
We can jazz it up, but DeLarverie, yes.
Orleans. And so so Stormy was a Black butch lesbian, and this is also when we go to Pride festivals now, and many Black and Latinx folk have, you know, PTSD symptoms because of the police presence at mainstream Pride festivals now. This is because in Pride's origination and in Stonewall, they operated, when it came to security, in more informal safety networks. So they would hire friends, and Stormy was one of these people. She basically operated as a security guard and or bouncer at the Stonewall Inn. And she was tired of the harassment, and she was also a drag king, but she was a Black butch lesbian. And so she's the one that everybody who was present at Stonewall says threw the first brick. So how in 2015 do we get a movie that posits it as someone who has another racial and gendered identity? It's ridiculous. And this is what is meant when we say things like institutional racism. There's a deep investment in obscuring the history of Stonewall, in erasing the fact that the main agitators were that of Black and Latinx trans women, and erasing the fact that a Black butch lesbian was also present at the Stonewall Inn, ignited the riot, and basically day in and day out protected these folk at the Stonewall Inn from getting harassed. The thing that I find interesting is that when you go now contemporaneously to specifically Black LGBTQ queer parties, balls and whatnot, they also operate with informal security networks, the same as we did in the past during Stonewall in the 60s, as opposed to hiring police officers and the history of the police in racialized communities, the harassment, the scrutiny, and so on and so forth. And so these traditions have continued beyond that. And so folks like Sylvia Rivera Sylvia Rivera, Marsha P. Johnson, Victoria Cruz, Miss Major, and Stormy all facilitated and were some of the main agitators. And what's unfortunate is that that gets lost. Even in the archival footage, when we see documentaries of Pride, most of the main footage that they've captured, you see these cis gay white men, going rah-rah and doing these things. And so we have to recognize that journalists, media folk can also hold racist views, can also focus stories and coverage on certain groups of people and give the perception that this is what really happened there. So that's a little bit of context in terms of understanding that Stonewall was an organized riot against police brutality and scrutiny. It was about antagonizing the state for its gendered and sexual tyranny. It was a very politicized, deeply grassroots activist type of resistance. It wasn't this party that we kind of see now. Where there's rainbows everywhere and everybody's supporting. I mean, no.
And make no mistake, we love those things, right? Like we love to party, and I do want, before we end, to talk about how far we've come in terms of social acceptance and political power and all those things. But I think it's also worth pointing out, Doc, because you mentioned that Sylvia and Marsha P found STAR, which is an advocacy organization for drag queens and trans youth, and really anybody, but especially advocating for trans youth and everything. And so then by 73, you have the Christopher Street Liberation Day Parade and festival. And just, a few years later from the 69 Stonewall riots, you literally have Sylvia Rivera having to storm the stage to give a speech to the crowd, because of course they have a stage, and it's set up like a traditional Pride, like we might know it today, with the stage and speakers. But literally she's booed off the stage by the largely cisgender, primarily white audience, while she gets on stage to talk about, while you all are enjoying the fruits of our labor, essentially, while you all are enjoying more social currency and political agency, we have folk who are in jail who are being sexually assaulted, right? We have folk who are hungry and starving. Your trans brothers and sisters need you. And they're literally booing her off the stage. And so I really encourage any of the folk who are watching or listening to Google Y'all Better Quiet Down, is essentially the name of the informal name of the speech that Sylvia gave to the audience. But it really highlights that just a few years later, after Stonewall, that people are beginning to forget about the very folk who, quote unquote, threw the first brick. Doc, I want to ask you about the ballroom scene, and then maybe I'll pick up after that. Talk a bit about ballroom and its founding and the politicizing of its founding, and then maybe we can talk a bit about how it's become commodified. But why does ballroom come into existence? I mean, it has roots in early 1920s Harlem. Contemporary ballroom kind of found its wings in the 70s. But why do we need ballroom? Why do folk like Crystal LaBeija and the Extravaganzas and other folk begin to create a scene like the ballroom scene?
Yeah, so ballroom and drag balls start in and around the 1920s, and they're mostly taking place in Greenwich Village and places in New York City, and the Cloak of Night, because they had a lot of ordinances in New York where you had to have 3 pieces of your assigned gendered clothing. It was really madness. So these things had to take place at night. But the unfortunate part about it is that when the Black drag queens and Black femme queens would try to compete in these competitions that were open to all, they wouldn't win prizes, they wouldn't be scored high, they would be, so racism essentially was at work. And so there was one pageant in particular, and this is documented in the documentary, The Queen, if y'all are interested. Actually, like, the documentary itself is so boring, but at the end—
Yeah, but the small part of—
yes, Crystal at the end, Crystal LaBeija, who talks about how Black girls never win prizes, this is unfair. They already knew who the winner was. This is why most of the girls didn't want to come and compete. So she's really calling out the ritualized racism that's at work.
Because what happens during the pageant, you have like a large number of contestants, but like this young white girl, basically who's wet behind the ears. She's a newbie. She wins the pageant over the more seasoned, even more beautiful queens, and Crystal's not having it.
Yes, very much so. And then I see there's a really quick question, and I'm going to answer this really quick. Sam, your question: as historians of BIPOC queer history, what is your understanding of why Compton Cafe riots are left out of history so often? That's a great question, Sam. And this has to do with the fact that there has to be a certain perception of pride. As I mentioned earlier, everybody really wants to see Stonewall as the end all and be all for queer liberation and resistance, whereas prior, right, Compton Cafe riots are prior to 1969, prior to Stonewall. So is the Cat Scratch Tavern. So is a number of, or so was the cafe in Philly, where they had a lunch counter resistance and sit-in because of the cafe didn't want drag queens and folks who dress as differently gendered in their cafe, and so they had a sit-in. And so the reason why this kind of history is obscured from the record is because historians are also invested, you know, in giving you a certain point of history. And so the Compton Cafe riots, as well as the Cat Scratch Tavern and other forms of resistance that exist prior and after the Stonewall, don't fit this pretty box picture of white cis gay male antagonizing on these 3 nights, because most of those resistances were made up, again, of Black and Latinx, LGBT folk, go-go dancers, sex workers, right? Most of those agitators who are involved in those riots are made up of those folks, and that's how they get erased from the record. And so back to Crystal. So Crystal's mad and she's over it. And so she goes off, and then a couple years later starts Ballroom. She starts the House of La Beja. Okay, the legendary House of La Beja has the most prizes, you know, has the most members. New York City is wrapped up in La Beja. Okay, that's just a quote from Paris is Burning. But anyway, so they create the House of La Beja. Pretty soon other houses pop up: the House of Corey, the House of Revlon, the House of Dupree, the House of Pendarvis, right? So they form their own scene, and that their scene is made up of Black and Latinx LGBTQ folk, primarily Black and Latinx femme queens, drag queens, trans women, and butch queens. So those are the folks who are involved in forming the scene. And it's not just a scene that is formed for entertainment. It literally was utilized when it reemerges in the 1980s in Harlem as a way to respond to the socio and political economic injustices that happened with the Reagan administration, that happened because of HIV/AIDS. And we basically had a whole governmental administration who turned their back on a whole community, did absolutely nothing to stop HIV/AIDS, didn't put any money in the research. I mean, there's recordings of them actually laughing at it because they're the ones who don't get it, right? So that ended up turning social welfare programs for Black gay men, Latinx gay men, and trans women were drying up. They were underfunded. And so they literally turned to each other and themselves and their community, and balls served as their entertainment and also safe havens when they got rejection from families. They formed their own families, they formed their houses. So it was the ball scene is a very politicized, activist-oriented entertainment scene. I think that folks misunderstand it now that we have popular notions of ballroom through programs like Legendary and so on. So it again comes across as this, it's just a big dance party and everybody in the queer community is, you know, a part of it. And it's like, no, I mean, this was deep-rooted activist organizing to make sure Black and Latinx folk were taken care of when their families turned their backs, when the government turned their backs. And they formed their houses where they were literally at one point physical houses where folks lived together, shared bills, communal living, all the things.
We saw a glimpse of that in the TV show Pose, which although it was dramatized, it did have some elements of true stories. We saw some of the characters, for example, from Paris is Burning, have their stories retold, and some of the queer legends, the body of the suitcase and those things. And so certainly, Doc, there has to be a benefit to having our narratives told more widely, to having shows like Pose and Legendary. And to those shows' benefits, unlike Paris is Burning, you have Black and brown, queer and trans folks as producers, as writers and directors and actors, right? And so unlike in Paris, where you have a white filmmaker who I believe made the film as her thesis to begin with, but she basically is the only one who got rich and famous off that movie. Everybody else dies broke, right? So there's a benefit to having Jack Mizrahi and Janet Mock and our lady, all those folk finally getting paid for their work But I wonder, Doc, what so that's obviously a good thing, right? To have the kind of mainstream acceptance to the ball scene, but also in queer culture in general. To have a Lil Nas X, right? To have these more mainstream, but what gets lost in the shuffle? Bring us to contemporary times, right? So we began with this riot. We now got top and bottom buns for Pride Month, right? But so what gets lost in the shuffle? What do we stand to lose by the sanitizing, the pink washing, the whitewashing of queer culture? You know, what do we stand to lose by not remembering the more revolutionary and activist origins of all these kind of queer movements?
Yeah, no, I mean, I love the fact that Pose is in existence. I think that it gives great context to the history of ballroom, the history of houses, the history of gay families, you know, all of those things. It's a great program, and if you think about it, it's only a couple of years old. And how long did it take? We interviewed Stephen Canals, one of the writers and producers of Pose, and how long and how many years did it take for him to get the okay and the green light?
I think he sent like over 300 emails to various, studios.
It took him a decade. It took him a decade of pleading and begging. So what begs the question is why? Why, if the acceptance is something that seemingly has now coming to folks so easily, why did it take 10 years for Pose when Livingston comes out with Paris is Burning in the 1980s when I'm born, right? And so by the time Pose comes out, I'm 42 years old. So there's still deep-rooted institutional resistance to giving a whole picture or a robust narrative of Pride's beginnings. And that investment is deeply rooted in white supremacy and gay racism, period. And also cisnormativity from white queer folk who are anti-trans. So that's literally it. That's what's behind it. And the problem with this is that it makes the presumption when we try to give this truncated or abbreviated version of Pride's beginnings, the thing that we lose is we lose our advocacy and our fire and our passion for equality. We don't have that as a community yet. We don't have that as a Black and Latinx communities. We don't have it as Black and Latinx LGBTQ communities, and we don't have it as LGBTQ communities either, right? We have more visibility in media and television, but we have trans women, Black trans women in particular, getting murdered year.
I'm going to ask you, what are some of the issues for folk who may not know? What are some of the issues facing Black and brown folk and trans folk and gender non-conforming folk, or poor queer people, right? Rural queer people. Right. What are some of the issues, and I've talked about this in my writings and in my advocacy, but what you have the Pride celebrations, and I love the drag and the food and the festivities and the parades, but what are some issues, if we could be Sylvia Rivera talking to the crowd, what are some issues I think are facing people that are often overlooked, that are still going on?
I think it's anti-trans views and transphobia that exist within and outside of LGBTQ communities. So trans folk get bombarded with anti-trans views from queer folk. They also get it from, straight folk. So it's this kind of double burden. You have Black LGBT folk and Latinx LGBT folk who have to deal with racism outside of and within LGBTQ communities. So these things are compounded for many folks in our community. You still have Black and Latinx LGBT folks suffering from houselessness, poverty, economic, strife, police scrutiny, brutality, murder, all at rates that white cis gays and lesbians just don't experience, don't have any context for, and don't understand. And so when you're dealing with all of that, right, and then you go to try and celebrate Pride, and then as soon as you get to the festival, and you're a person who knows all this history and knows all this and has to deal with all of this, then as soon as you get to the actual festival, some white, cis gay queen comes up and says, "Hey, girlfriend, sister." You see what I'm saying? So for me, as an old gay.
But from personal experience, like you often, you will go to the nightclub to have a good time, and they think that you're some kind of jazz singer or some kind of, and without knowing.
I'm an entertainer. There has to be a reason that my Black self is up in a gay club. It can't just be because I'm gay myself. Yeah. So these racist views aren't just institutionally, aren't just, integrated into journalists and historians. They're also personable and subjective. These things are dealt with constantly. I haven't gone to a Pride festival and I don't know how long, because I don't feel like dealing with it. I've stopped going into queer spaces, period, unless they are Black LGBT folk, because I do not feel like dealing with overt acts of racism from white gays and lesbians, and I don't feel like dealing with the microaggressions from them either. So they waving around their little pride flag, got all this rainbow on, and they're racist as hell. Like, I'm sick of that, right? Because I'm already, you know, having to think about race when I walk my puppy. I'm already thinking about race when I enter my classroom and nobody believes I'm the actual professor. And now when I'm going into a gay space, somehow you're antagonizing me, and this is what's lost. The only reason why we got liberation as queer folk has to do with Black femmes, Black trans women, right? You know, and so for me, it's the audacity of white gay racism that somehow I don't belong in a space, but you do. Y'all just got politicized in 1969. We've been on that. We've been on intersectionality. We've been on empowerment. We've been on liberation. You don't even know what liberation looked like without us. But somehow I have to deal with microaggressions, and for you to ask me to explain myself in a queer space, girl, get out of here, honey. And so that's what's lost. What's lost is when we don't understand our true beginnings and true history, then we start acting as if we already know it and operate in public spaces. And all you do is look like a fool. So it would behoove LGBT folk to not just see Pride as a party, to actually learn their own history, right? Like any other group of people, right? And this is the problem, is white folk aren't interested in learning no American history, and they ain't interested in learning their queer history either. And that's a problem, you know, because when you do that, you're just walking around as an uninformed, ignorant person. And you need to be walking around knowing what's going on there, you know?
Yeah. Well, let's take a look at the chat function, see if we have any questions from folk. Yeah, folk are saying that watching Pose made them check out Paris is Burning, so enlightening. Certainly, both wonderful resources. I think, speaking of resources, Doc, there doesn't seem to be, you know, like, I love, okay, look, and Victoria asked, do you have any resources for Black queer spaces? Because I don't even know of any. I don't even know how to go about finding them, how to go about learning my own Black queer history, because literally I'm by myself and I have no one. And yeah, so thank you for that question, Victoria. That's what I was going to ask. Doc, what are some resources for folk who want to, for Black queer folk who want to learn more about our own histories, but also folk who are not Black or brown and queer, but who want to know more about the true teas, how things really went down, both some real documents and real things, but also maybe some fictionalized accounts of movies and TV shows and things of that nature. What are some things you recommend perhaps to your students, to your classes?
I mean, to myself. No, I mean, it's something where the record is there, the history is there. I mean, literally, you can put in things like Black LGBTQ liberation. You can put in things like, now what's great is the Center for Black Equity is a Black LGBTQ organization. It's based in DC. And this organization is actually the organization that held its first Black LGBT Pride in 1991, because they were tired of the gay racism at mainstream prides. And so if y'all notice, there's Black LGBT prides that happen every year. A lot of Black folk and Latinx folk have their own separate prides that emphasize racial injustice and also LGBTQ empowerment, and that they found mainstream pride festivals seem to be too business oriented, corporatized, and it's just this kind of empty party. And so that's a good resource to find out the history of Black Pride festivals, and also a more of a robust history of Black queer liberation and those things. BEAM is another great organization that focuses on the mental health struggles of Black LGBT folk, that's started by Yolo Akili. That organization is excellent as well. And then, you know, unfortunately, it has to be things like Facebook groups and things on social media. There are a number of Black LGBT authors who have books. Darnell Moore, he gives a lot of context in his book around Pride and its beginnings and history of Black LGBT folks, retelling it through the lens of his life as a Black gay man. I'm coming out with a book soon, and it's gonna have all this stuff in there.
You are.
Yes, and so it's gonna have all that in there. And so those are some of the things, and like Jaison mentioned, like, there are great shows like Pose. Lena Waithe is doing great things with her Master of None season 5, where she actually shows a Black lesbian couple together, because every time that just don't happen, there's always a Black woman with a white woman, which I'm like, Okay. So, there aren't really that many depictions. There's things like Moonlight. There's things like
the movie Pariah, which
Pariah is
talks about the black
Gun Hill Road. Gun Hill Road.
Gun Hill Road is a brilliant film.
Excellent film.
And even for the pop stuff like Noah's Ark.
Yes.
Chronicles. These are part of the Black queer canon. And then the obvious choice is over 300 episodes of Strange Fruit that we've done over the past. I think we started some 10 years ago, but there literally are all kinds of episodes where we're talking to Black queer thought leaders and authors and activists and writers. Thank you, Lisa, for that plug. But I think Strange Fruit is a great resource. We've actually heard from people all over the United States and even the world who have learned about these issues through our podcast.
There's another question. There's one here. It says, all the rainbow washing that large corporations have been doing over the years, what are your thoughts about holding these businesses accountable and stopping the co-optation of the LGBTQ movement? This is a really excellent question. And this was Lisa's frustration, and this is both Jay and I's frustration too when it comes to Pride every year. All of a sudden you got rainbow Converse and then you got a rainbow smoothie.
And Skittles removes the colors from their rainbows, right?
Yeah, so then it's like
that rainbow belongs to queer people just for that 1 month, right? So they literally got a bag of Skittles in black and white.
And the corporatizing of Pride is just no different in corporatizing of Black History Month, Women's History Month, Latinx History Month.
And that ice cream in Walmart,
Yeah, it's the same thing. I mean, I remember one ad in particular, I think it was a Toyota ad years ago that was celebrating Martin Luther King. And they had Martin Luther King in the rearview mirror of this Toyota, and it was like dreams in the distance or something they tried. And I'm like, girl, Martin, as somebody who was anti-capitalist and into socialist democracy, he would have never wanted his image replicated to sell or push a product. And that's one of the big empty problems. And this is what rainbow washing or pink washing does. It takes away the political emphasis of a particular community and a movement and forms of resistance and puts it into a product like, hey, if you buy this t-shirt, you care about LGBT folk. So it's a cop-out because folks who buy, like I see Forever 21 is selling femme shirts. Like I had bought this femme shirt from Forever 21 and I'm like, half of the folks who are walking around with this shirt that says femme don't even understand femme to be a queer identity, period. Okay, I'm sick of these straight cis women walking around here talking about that they're femme. No, you're not. Femme is a queer identity, is a queer expression. Okay, so you're not femme, right? Because femme doesn't mean feminine, right? And so we got to learn those kinds of things, right? So the fact that Forever 21 is pushing these shirts, half the people that are wearing them think that femme stands for feminine, don't understand femme to be a queer identity. And this is one of the problems when corporations and money get involved with social justice causes, because they erase the politics and the impetus for the reason why this community is struggling for freedom. They take all of those things away and turn freedom into some kind of capitalist product endeavor. A way to hold those kind of corporations accountable is, hey, not so much pushing your product, right? But encouraging folks to donate to Black and Latinx LGBT youth organizations to create things in their communities, right? These businesses and corporations have all types of money. They can build up, I don't know how many LGBT centers, they can build up old folks' homes for just LGBT folk. Those are the kinds of things that businesses need to invest in, and those are the kinds of things they need to do. We don't need no another rainbow t-shirt or rainbow sneaker. We don't need no rainbow lanyard or no rainbow baseball hat. We need investment in LGBTQ people. And that means caring about how they're doing economically, socially, and culturally. That means building things, building up those communities and investing in those ways. That's how you do it, right? Under capitalism, if you don't put real money behind it, it's empty, it means nothing. And so, pushing a sneaker and a t-shirt, and this is the problem too, in Pride's origination, when you're first having these festivals, the 1973 Christopher Street, where, Sylvia is booed off stage, they had all the booths there. All of the booths were advocacy groups. They were activist groups. None of them were, look, come, it's a coffee shop and we have a rainbow in the window. Here's some bagels and they're gay today, right? So even the dynamic of when you're walking through a Pride festival, it's nothing but businesses. And it used to be causes, right?
And Doc, we both know that it's not easy trying to hold power to account to try to check and challenge these local pride festivals or institutions is not easy work. I want to take a quick pause. Speaking of Pride Month, and we also just celebrated Juneteenth, we got to give a shout out to Beyonce, but not only Beyonce, but Big Frida, right? Because, talking about, the expansiveness now of Black queerness, so Beyonce's new song dropped. It's called, what's it called, Doctor?
Is it called Bless My Soul or
something my soul? But
Don't Break My Soul.
Don't Break My Soul. There we go. A large part of that song is Big Frida setting the tone, right? Like, much like Frida did, much like she did with the Formation, right? And so as soon as Beyonce, I'm lukewarm about. Sorry, y'all. Don't record that part. Edit that part out, Lisa. But I'm lukewarm about Beyonce in general. But so I was like, well, let me just check out this track and so it's first of all, as soon as I heard that house music in the background, right?
Yes.
And, there's a large history of Black queer folk and house music. I heard the bounce music too. Yes, you're right. But I heard the house music, and then I heard Big Frida chanting, and then I did, and it was life to me. And so, can you talk as we begin to wrap up, Doc, about the brilliance, in particular, of Black queer folk and queer brown folk and just Black trans women, trans magic and Black queer magic and all those kind of magics. Not to say that everybody else ain't magical too, because we all are special in our own way. But in particular, Doc, I'm loving Black queer magic that is Big Frida, that is Lil Nas X, that is Lena Waithe, that seems to be everywhere these days, and us finally getting grace for that, not being behind the scenes like Bayard Rustin was, but actually being able to be in the forefront and enjoy the fruits of your laboring and to get the roses and get the light. Well, what are your thoughts about those things?
Oh yeah, no, I mean, it's like a great time to be alive right now because of all those things you mentioned. Right before we even started the webinar, we were telling Lisa about P Valley and Uncle Clifford's character, Uncle Clifford's character on P Valley, I see him as Lafayette from True Blood 2.0. I see him as a character that's bigger and bolder than Lafayette and his incantation was in that show. I'm so pleased and excited that you have Black queer and trans creatives behind the scenes pushing these types of films, plays, and really giving us more robust picture of Black queer and trans life. So I mean, I love that. I mean, I love Lena Waithe's 20s that centers around this Black butch lesbian and her group of good Judies. And her pursuit of love. It's just a regular show. Even her Boomerang remix, Lena Waithe's Boomerang, they have a bisexual Black male character in it, and they also have 2 lesbian characters in it that are basically in a Black lesbian relationship together. So again, once you get Black, and like you mentioned with Pose, you had Janet Mock and Black trans folks writing for that show. So once you get Black queer and trans folks behind films and television, and when it comes to representation of Black LGBTQ identity, you get a robust 3-dimensional picture. When you have, like, the thing that I find funny is every Pride Month, there's the on-demand selection Pride films, and every single one of them, either there are no Black or Latinx LGBTQ characters, or if there is one, their world is completely white. And it's just not normal. It's just not how things are. I mean, it's just like Friends and them filming the show in New York and everybody, the newspaper man stand, the coffee shop dude, the cab driver, everybody white. No, that's not New York.
Shout out also to BET Plus, which during this Pride Month released on BET Plus, B-Boy Blues, which is the movie version of the book. Goodness, that book I think is from the 90s. Yeah, I mean, that's another legendary book. So folk can check out B-Boy Blues.
And Ian Patrick Polk, Ian Patrick Polk, who did The Skinny, who did Noah's Ark, he's writing on P Valley this season.
Oh, yeah, right on. We're everywhere. There was another question that I want to get to before we close. So Sam asks, how do we, as the queer community of U of L, employees and students, hold the school responsible for its role in our rights within the school, especially Black, Indigenous people of color, our rights and safety? For instance, truly inclusive trans bathrooms, and for example, the corporate relationship with Chick-fil-A. And I'll go even further, and this is from my own observation as a former student, as someone who often does events at U of L, who's just a part of the campus community. I see U of L tout its corporate rate, its rating as a gay-friendly school. I see them give lots and lots and lots of money to the local pride festivals, as they have done for a very long time. But I wonder, are they just giving lip service to those of us who are queer and trans students, faculty, staff, and community members? Is the payoff there for what they do in this kind of front-facing way in terms of giving money to pride festivals and touting itself as a queer-friendly school? Is the payoff really there for those of us who go to school there or work there or love?
No, yeah, I think that it's no different. It's a business, just like any body else, and it needs to be held accountable to those things. So a way that employees and students can make sure that U of L is doing its due diligence is by advocating for the LGBT Center, for instance, to have a budget. Okay, so the university needs to give the LGBT Center a budget that's every year, right? Just like other social programs there.
And a big budget.
And a big budget at that. It needs to put the money behind the investment. And so donating to a mainstream pride festival is just not where the money should go. It should go in terms of the LGBT Center, Sweet Evening Breeze that's happening, like invest in that. Put money behind that, give money to that. Make sure that programs like PAS or Women in Gender Studies, those are protected programs that no matter the budgetary crisis, those programs are protected academic-wise from either folding or losing. So that's how you show your commitment to diversity and inclusion and equity. That's how a university with a budget and money shows its commitments, is they show them in those ways. So divesting out of places like Chick-fil-A, which are homophobic and transphobic, investing in the LGBT Center, more money to give to students to support student programming and those types of things. Invest more money in programs like Women in Gender Studies, and right, because a lot of the students from U of L essentially learn intersectionality, learn racial justice, learn gender justice from these programs. So these programs should not be struggling financially. So that is the way, right? Advocate and continue to push back against gendered bathrooms on campus and say, yes, no, we need non-gendered bathrooms on campus. We need all-inclusive bathrooms, period, right? And that's how I feel safe. So those types of things are the way, I think, to show a true investment in diversity, equity, and inclusion. That is the way to really show up. So if you want to donate, if you're a university or a program and you want to donate to an LGBT cause, a mainstream pride festival is just not, that is not it. The money is needed, and like in the LGBT Center, the Sweet Evening Breeze, it's needed for activist programs like Louisville Youth Group. They need money to support young trans and LGBT. There's so many different organizations and initiatives that are struggling in the city of Louisville that bring empowerment and joy to LGBT folk, and they're simply not invested in enough. So.
Well, Doc, thank you for this wonderful conversation, and thanks to all the folks who've listened and asked questions and cheered us on. So I want, Doc, would you let people know how they can perhaps follow the two of us on social media, or perhaps someone wants to check out Strange Fruit Podcast? How can folk, get in touch with us or hear episodes of the podcast?
Yes, of course. So
we're on hiatus right now. We'll be back. Stay tuned.
We are going to be back.
We have a lot of episodes to get through in the meantime.
Yes. So we started doing Strange Fruit in 2012. So we have 340 plus episodes. We cover topics from politics and pop culture. We've interviewed folks like Jill Scott, Janelle Monáe, Darnell Moore, Brittany Cooper.
Beyonce's mom, yes.
Beyonce's mom. That video of us interviewing Beyonce's mom on the red carpet at Derby, and that child almost died with that, but that's on Facebook. That's on the Strange Fruit Facebook page. Y'all can check that out. I mean, we've interviewed Usher. So we have tons of material there. And if you're interested in all of these conversations around Black LGBTQ history, politics, pop culture, representation, all of that we kind of discuss in the show. And Lisa put a link to our archival page on NPR. And you can check out those episodes if you want. All of my profiles, for the most part, on Facebook, I'm Kaila Adia Story. So send me a friend request. On Instagram, I'm Doctress Story, and on Twitter, I'm Doctress Story. So DocTreessSSSTORY. Okay, yeah. And Jaison is Jaison Gardner. That is his Twitter handle. And then you can also check out at Strange Fruit Pod. That's our Twitter handle for the show. And Jaison, all of his handles are the same, Jaison Gardner on Instagram and on Twitter. So you can keep up with us and follow us on social media where we kind of discuss these things and stuff like that.
Thank you for the kind words, Sam. Thank you everybody for joining us, and happy Pride Month, happy Juneteenth, happy whatever you celebrate this month, Father's Day, anything you're celebrating. But thank you all for spending time with us for this last hour, and hopefully we'll see y'all next time. Bye-bye, everybody.
Thank you all so much. With everything going on in your busy schedules, I just can't thank you enough for taking time out of your day to share this knowledge and information. I always learn when I hear from you all, and I hope you know what a treasure you are to the community. But thank you, and thanks for everybody for tuning in.
Thanks for
Thank you. Thank y'all. Happy Pride.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.